And Bob, we're live. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bert. It's a pleasure to meet you, man. Thanks for reaching out.
Absolutely. Well, before we start recording, we were talking about validation, so I want to get straight into it. You're talking about how a lot of times in the startup world, people talk about you have to quit your job, you have to go all in, you have to fundraise immediately, you have to be super aggressive. But you've got a bit of a different take on it, which is like, don't quit your job just yet. Actually go out there, validate your thesis, get people to pay you, and then maybe you'll have some in your hands. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So, by way of background, I think I'm entering my 25th year in the startup world. I've done a handful of venture-backed companies. I was a software engineer by background. When I started, I was CTO of my first couple companies, CEO of the last couple. Learned a lot and thought I saw a lot of patterns. I also spent 15 years going very deep as a mentor for Techstars. Also, I've mentored 500 startups teams, Alchemists, YC, a bunch of different founders. The blessing there is that I got to see the inside of so many startups, not just my startups, but other startups. And I have a disease that makes me want to go deep with all these companies and spend all that time with them. It's not. I don't claim to be smart for doing that, but it's something that I'm passionate. I was and still am, and always will be passionate about. Is just learning and trying to help other founders. So you do that enough, you start to see patterns. Like, oh, you have that. I've seen 25 other companies that had that problem too. Here's how they solved it, and you can be more and more helpful the more of those patterns that you encounter and engage with. However, something weird happened after the patterns. You start, I think, unless I'm a lunatic, you start to see the principles that underlie the patterns. There's a reason that 95% of startups fail. And as we were talking about before, it's not because there's not enough passion. It's not because there's not enough perseverance. It's not because any of those things that we talk about, like founders, what makes a good founder, this, that, and the other thing. 95% failure rate is not attributable to founder characteristics, right? There's something else going on there. And after all those years working with all of those founders, I thought I started to see some principles. And it wasn't clear at first. I think I probably first had this epiphany, if you will. That's an overstatement, but first started noticing myself thinking about things differently was about a decade ago. Took a walk with a founder. I used to meet founders for coffee a lot. And this founder wanted to talk, get my feedback, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, meet me at Green Lake. In Seattle, there's a park called Green Lake Park. Beautiful park, great walk, about an hour around the park. I said, meet me there, let's walk. So we walked around, and I found myself getting very frustrated. First 5 or 10 minutes with any founder, good. Tell me what you do, what you're working on, how's that work? Okay, good, I got it. Now, the only thing I want to talk about is how you're going to build a business. I don't care about the product anymore. I get it. Your product's early, it'll get better. You know product, you know your customer, you know a lot of stuff. Great. How are you going to make this a business? Founders never want to talk about that. And so I found myself asking questions that the founder had no answer for and didn't have much of an appetite to even talk about. Always wanted to come back to the product and how big the market was and things like this. And that frustration led me to think more about how I could get founders to stop doing that for my own sanity, if for no other reason, just to be able to meet with a founder and feel like it was productive for me too. Like I felt like I could contribute something to the founder. And over the years, what I thought I saw was two things are underlying the 95% failure rate: uncertainty, that's obvious, and time. Those two things are what make venture scale startups ridiculously hard. Because you can't foresee the future. You're trying to do new things that nobody's ever done. Maybe it's a new product, new market. Something's new about that. You're new to it. You don't bring all these skills and experience of being a serial founder, so you're going to make a bunch of mistakes. There's so much uncertainty that founders, I found, were not acknowledging. Like they weren't afraid of it, and I thought you should be afraid of it. Like you're gonna quit your job for this thing that you're passionate about, and you're going to try something that fails 95% of the time, you have a better chance of summiting Mount Everest than you do getting out alive from a startup. You should take that seriously. And by the way, uh, all those things about the uncertainty that make it hard, there's a clock running too. You have a personal runway. If you have investors, they have a runway. If you have a team, they have a runway. If you have a family, they have a runway. All of these things are great in the beginning, but over time, you start to lose those things. There's a saying in the venture capital world that time kills all deals, and it's absolutely true. It also kills all the startups. When I read about some startup that failed because you know, various reasons, but it's often they ran out of money, right? But in actuality, they didn't run out of money. They ran out of time, and they should have run out of time because they never once, in all of the time, and I say this, with humility, it's not 100% true, but it's damn close. The vast majority of founders never say, "Yeah, we could get there, but can we get there on time?" And really take that exercise seriously of figuring out what are the things we have to accomplish and how long will that take. Because another aphorism, uh, being early is the same as being wrong. Like you launch this product and it's, if it was AI 10 years ago and you're like, yeah, but it's going to be big. Yeah, but it's not, the market's not ready for it. So you might have had a great idea for a great business, but it was too early. And being early is the same as being wrong. So is being late. Being late is also the same as being wrong. You could have all the greatest plans in the world. I see lots of fantastic founders working on great companies and big markets, but they're not able to get there quick enough. They do run out of time, which often equates to running out of money. But they had money, and they raised money on the premise that we're going to raise for an 18 month time frame. We're going to start raising in 12 months. Here's what we're going to do with that money. Blah blah blah. And then that 12 months comes around, and they didn't reach that milestone. In fact, they didn't even really have a clear idea of what that milestone was. It was just kind of roughly work hard and fast in that direction and make progress on things. And they do run out of time. And so when I started thinking more and more about how I could help startups, I started. I'm a total broken record. Uh, Founders who know me, and they come to me because they want this particular thing. If they want something else, like they're not going to get it from me. But I started thinking about how can I get founders to think about this stuff. And so when I would ever have a coffee meeting, and I still do this now, it takes me 5 minutes to figure out, okay, what do you do? Who's your customer? What's the product differentiator? Okay, good. Now, where do you need to be in 4 to 6 months? And I don't mean like in 4 to 6 months. I mean on what day within that time frame at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. February 11th, what are you going to have? I want to know. Do you know what that is? Do you know what that needs to be? Do you know what you can do that would unlock something for the business? Because if all you do is make progress, it's a crapshoot whether or not that progress you made is what your next investors are going to value and think, oh, you're a good fit for our portfolio. We want to invest in you. Often it's not, because a lot of founders are product focused folks and they work a lot on product. And it's not that investors don't care about product. You got to have a good product, but that's a cost of entry. That's not a differentiator. Like, good. I'm assuming you're going to build a good product. I want to know how you're going to build a good business. And it's very rare that focusing all on product is necessary in those first, say, 6 months. And the reason we say 6 months is that's how far your headlights go. If you tell me, I just had a call with a founder and he said, yeah, so we're going to raise for 18 months and, we're going to get here in a year. And it was like 11 things that they were going to get to in a year. I was like, really? How do you know that? Like, can you convince investors that they should believe you? Right? Because those are easy things to say. And first of all, it's a little bit of a warning signal that you have 11 things in mind that you're going to do over the course of a year which is not a lot of time, with this money. And it's not clear that any of them, let alone all of them, are somehow directly linked to you reaching the milestone your next investors are going to care about. And if you don't care about what your next investors care about, then I hope you're bootstrapping, or I hope you've raised the last round you'll ever need to raise, because that's Dangerville. Like if you want, you don't have to be a venture scale startup. You don't have to do that. You can bootstrap. You can, get some friends and family money, get it kickstarted, run it, have a good business, create some jobs, have a fantastic lifestyle. That's a great thing to do. Uh, if you want to build a venture scalable company, you will probably have to raise venture capital. That's the venture part of venture scale. Like it takes a lot of money to grow a significant business. If you want to do that, then you're going to be on the treadmill every 12 to 18 months. If you're building a great product into a big market, you know, there's a likelihood that you'll need more capital to take advantage of that market, which means when you show up at those cycles, you need to look like the kind of a company that can raise capital. If you don't look like the kind of company that can raise capital, whether it's pre-seed, seed, series A, B, C, you're going to struggle. There's going to be a lot of friction. High likelihood you won't raise money. And then you're going to write the blog post that says we ran out of money. But you didn't run out of money. You ran out of time because you didn't focus on the right stuff. You didn't focus on the stuff that would get you to that milestone that your next investors would agree is the place you ought to be. And it's remarkable um, uh, how many founders can't tell you what that is. If I say to you, "Oh, you're building a company, good. Where are you at? Blah blah blah. Are you going to raise money? Yeah. When are you going to raise? Whenever they pick a date. What milestone do you need to reach that those investors would say, "Oh, you got there? That's just what we invest in. That's great. We want to learn more." They won't be able to tell you what that milestone is. If they do, it'll be some big vague thing that is generally like hard and fast in a direction and get some progress and it'll be big. If it's big, we'll raise. If it's not big, we won't, but we're going to make it big. Instead, it's better to say, and you can find this out, you can go talk to the investors before you raise. Say, hey, here's what we are, here's what we do. We're thinking about raising in Q2, but we want to know what milestone would you want us to have before you'd think we're a good fit for you? And you'll learn a few things. First of all, you might learn that that's not the right investor for you, right? Because there's no milestone you could possibly hit that they would care about. You're too early for them in other ways that are not a good fit. But you might also learn what they do care about, and it'll allow you to focus. Because if fundraising is important to you, and again, it doesn't have to be. Like, the best outcomes I know of are bootstrap founders who took on a little bit of money, maybe, because they could, because they had, they didn't need it, but they took on a little. It allowed them to grow a little bit more. They had a huge exit and they owned 80% of the company or 90% of the company, or they bootstrapped it the whole way. Those are great stories. The opposite is true too. You can get to a Series C and end up broke effectively, given all of the opportunity costs that you spent as a really smart person who could have been working for Google for $200,000 to $400,000 a year, and instead you spent 10 years building a startup, and you ended up with some money, but not what you thought, and probably less than you would have made if you just worked at Google for a decade, right? So figuring out where you need to, what the right next place is for you to be, and then being able to tell a cogent story about how you could get there. And fundraising conversations change materially when you have in mind a very specific milestone on a very specific date, and you can tell a story, a mathematical story, not a hand waving, rah rah story, but you can model out what you think has to be true in order for you to get there, and the investor agrees. Wow, yeah, I hope you get to 500K MRR, and if you did that in 6 months, you'd be a great fit for us. And wow, you just showed me a spreadsheet that quantifies the assumptions that you think have to be true in order for you to get there. And I think you can do that. I believe you because you've accounted for, the most important assumptions. And damn, you did it over time. You're not going to run out of time. You might still run out of time, but you showed me that you had a specific milestone in mind and you have a competent, compelling, and cogent story about how you could actually get there with the capital I'm going to give you. Like, that's a rarity. You don't see that very often. So, as a founder, if you want to stand out, uh, tell a cogent story about your next milestone, and your fundraising friction will go down a lot, I suspect.
Now, Bob, there's a lot to break down in what you've just. There's a lot of things, but I want to start out with some you point out, which is a lot of founders often they're under the assumption that if they, as a smart person, go raise a bunch of money and work on a startup for a decade, that they're going to end up with a whole bunch of money and be the next Brian Chesky and be a billionaire and their life will be all nice. But as you mentioned, you could build a bootstrap startup like Ben Chestnut, Dan Curzius, build it for 17 years, sell for 12 billion, and you own all of it with your partner, so you get all the money. Or you could go all the way to Series C, as you point out, and end up completely broke. I want to talk to you about how a founder can make that decision. Like, there's a big debate, like about being venture backed versus, and you've built 4 venture backed startups. So, how does a founder make that decision of I should bootstrap this versus I should go fundraise for this?
Uh, well, so it's not an easy question. It's different for different kinds of businesses, different kinds of founders. At a minimum, you should know what you're getting yourself into. Don't think that the choice is between raising money or not raising money. It's between you know two paths that have a different experience for the founder, among other considerations. If you bootstrap, and I ran into one of our members in the wild, not at one of our events or anything, and we were catching up, and he's bootstrapping, and I said, "Oh, cool. So where you at, and what's going on, and how can I help?" And he said this, that, and the other. I said, "Oh," and so I just asked him, like, do you have a next milestone in mind? And he didn't, because he was bootstrapping. He's not accountable to anybody, right? So he gets to do whatever he wants, right? But he also doesn't get guidance from people who have a stake in his success, right? He doesn't get accountability from the people who could fire him, a board, right? And those things, it'd be a weird thing to say, God, I wish I could do something where I could get fired as opposed to something that I couldn't get fired. But there is something to be said for accountability, right? And for vested interests. If people have a vested interest in your success, then they're more likely to want to help you. And startups are hard, and you're going to need help. So, one of the side effects of raising capital uh, is you surround yourself with a bunch of people who also want you to succeed, not just you, right? Uh, the the notion that the decision is, do I want to be a billionaire or go broke? That's also a false decision. Uh, you know, the vast majority of companies that raise venture scale don't end up with billionaire founders, right? Lots and lots of exits happen along the way, and of course, many, many, many venture-backed companies go to zero, and the founders lose everything, right, including all those years of work. Um, so the choice is not, gosh, do I want to build a big company and be hyper rich, or build a small company and just have a little bit of money? Um, you know, both outcomes can happen on both sides of that decision. So, it shouldn't be about the money in that respect, because those are outliers. All the guys you mentioned, those are outliers. That's not how this business goes. That's a small percentage of the people who, for various reasons, sometimes they're brilliance, sometimes luck, sometimes right place, right time, sometimes who knows what. Lots of things contribute to those outlier outcomes. Don't think you can't manufacture an outlier outcome. So don't think you are. Like, you need to, as one serial founder, sold 2 companies to Google, and he was out speaking about it, and somebody had asked, "Yeah, that's really great. You sold 2 companies to Google. Like, how did you do that? Like, how did you make that happen?" Because you don't make it happen. And he quoted, I think it's Green Beret, some elite military branch. He said, you don't sit around a conference room and say, okay, we're going to land a helicopter in the desert. We're going to take four guys. We're going to go up those stairs. We'll kill the guys playing poker, and then we're going to go into the room. We're going to take the hostage, and da da da, and then we're going to fly out of there. You can't plan that shit out. You put yourself in play, and you let the situation develop. Then you rely on your training, and you figure your way out. And that's what you got to do as a startup too. He said, look, I didn't engineer a sale of a company to Google a second time. He built a company. He knew it was about time. He started, putting feelers out and started having conversations, and one thing led to another. And that's how it happened to turn out. Didn't have to turn out that way. He didn't make it happen that way. But he relied on his training and experience, and he put himself in play and let the situation develop. So as a founder, like, first of all, understand though, there are categories of companies that can be venture scale and categories that can't be venture scale. So you should first, don't worry about outlier outcomes, but just figure out, is it the kind of a business that is in principle venture scalable? Anything that has, services, brick and mortar, things like that, they're just not very venture scalable. So if that's what you want to do, go have a great life, build a great company, and just don't raise capital, because investors aren't going to typically invest in those kinds of things. Next, like, okay, it is in principle, it's a product-ish company. So how big is the market, right? If the addressable market isn't big enough, then it could still be a great business, and you should still go after it. But you're probably only going to raise a little bit of money, right? And it may not be from a marquee VC. It might be friends and family, then some angel money, and you get either a cash flowing business or a $20 million exit, and all the investors got 5x, and you made life changing money, and bravo! Like, that's a terrific outcome. No unicorn in sight. That's a great outcome. If the market's big enough, and the product and the team, and a lot of other things align, then you might be able to put yourself in play and let the situation develop, raise some money, thinking it's going to be a venture scale track. But remember, if you get too committed to one thing early on, and you're not willing to entertain a pivot, for example, when things don't go well, that can be hazardous. Lots and lots of early companies pivot. The thing that you start with is not the thing you end with. We see this all the time. Our top performing portfolio company, 180-degree pivot. I invested in them when they were one thing. We all agreed that could be venture scale. Let's roll up our sleeves and we'll go do that. And we discovered, actually, not so much. And the founder undertook a highly deliberate, thoughtful pivot and came out with a different company, raised capital, and is crushing it. Right? Don't get too attached to the company, to the idea, to the solution. Right? Be willing to be passionate about building a business and trying to navigate that. If it matters to you, like, oh, I can only do this business, okay, that you might still do that, and that's where the most passionate entrepreneurs come from. But you should just know that passion is not what makes your company better. Passion is what makes you stick at it when things get hard, and they will get hard. And if you're not passionate about it, you're going to quit. Investors don't want passionate entrepreneurs because we think, gosh, passion just produces such great businesses. It's because passion makes you not quit, right? It inspires your team to not quit. It inspires your family not to, abandon you. It inspires your, investors to give you a little extra capital, right? And not to, the board not to fire you or whatever, right? So knowing that your company is in principle scalable is a necessary function of getting on that treadmill. And there's gatekeepers to those treadmills too. Lots of angel investors will invest in lots of things. They'll invest purely in founders. I like you, trust you, I've known you. Here's some money, go do that. You'll figure it out. Institutional investors rarely do that, and so that early money might be enough to get you started figuring some stuff out, but the rules change the further up the stack the fundraising stack you go, it becomes more and more about a business every time you raise. So, uh, you know, good. Put yourself in play. Let the situation develop, but know that if you get on that treadmill of venture scale, you're accountable for milestones every fundraising cycle, every year or so. You better have hit a milestone that your next investors think is the right one for you to look like a top decile company to them. Uh, uh, and if you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble, and it won't go so good for you. You know, founders who are struggling now in the last year or so, it's been pretty bad because a lot of companies raised at really juicy valuations, and with that valuation came an expectation that you're going to hit a milestone that's going to enable a 2 or 3x increase in your valuation for the next round. And when you show up, if you raised a seed round at 25 million valuation and you had $500 in MRR, but you're a hot company in a hot space, what milestone do you need to reach to justify a $50 million valuation for your next round? A lot, right? Because those next investors are going to be a little more level headed about how they make that decision. And one thing that every founder who wants to build a venture scale company should know is active investors nowadays see 1,000 deals a year, right? They're going to invest in 8-ish, right? So how are you going to be one of those companies? And how are you even going to get a look, right? So if you don't look, at least I mentioned top decile, like when I see companies coming from introductions or just incoming or outreach or whatever it is, they have to look like a top decile company to me for me to even spend a minute on them, because I can't look at 1,000 deals. So how do I decide? So if you're pitching me a company and you're raising $10 million, I can just hit delete. I won't hit delete. I'll say, hey, not a good fit. But I don't invest in $10 million rounds. I invest in $1 million rounds, right? Maybe a $2 million round, never a 10. I'll never invest from the fund in a $10 million. It's not our thesis, right? So you should, as a founder, know that when you're raising your next round of capital. I had another conversation earlier today with another founder. They raised at 7 million, and they didn't hit the knock it out of the park milestone. Like, we need to raise again. Do we really have to just do an extension of our previous round? Can we we made progress? Can we increase our valuation at all? And they're like, can we go to 8 million? Like, you could, but what signal are you sending? Like 15% increase in valuation? Like, what you're saying is we didn't execute. Otherwise, we wouldn't be raising at a 15% increase. We'd be raising at a 100% or 200% increase. So that's a bad signal. And they're raising for 18 months runway, coming off of like not a great performance, right? Lots of reasons, lots of smart founders, good market, good, like a lot of good things about it, but they didn't get the milestone they needed to get to. And now they're saying, bet on us again. We didn't get it on the last one, but we'll get it this next time. Right? That's a signal. Like, if you come to me justifying a 2x or a 3x valuation over your last round, the signal that sends is we executed. We got money and we executed. Now we're going to do it again. If you come with a flat round, a down round, or a barely up round, there's lots of reasons why things happen. Some of those things are out of control of founders. But the bottom line is that team did not execute to a milestone that warrants a meaningful valuation. So, are you really going to do that? I don't know. We'll see. The founder needs to make that decision. But those are the kinds of things, like when you get on the venture scale track, you have to care about your investors. I was telling you about that founder I saw who was bootstrapping, and I saw him in the wild. I'm like, what's your next milestone? And he's like, yeah, I don't really know. Like, probably something like this. I'm like, oh, you don't have anything like specific in mind? Like, and I ended up saying, well, what do you think investors would want to see? It's like, oh, I don't care what investors say. I'm doing this. I'm not raising capital. I'm bootstrapping. I don't care what investors think. I said, oh man, I think you should still care. Like what investors care about is building great companies, like big companies, like fast growing like companies that are successful. Like that's why they do what they do. And if you say, yeah, but I'm bootstrapping, I don't care what. That's why I'm bootstrapping, because I don't want to care about what investors think. Well, I get that to some degree, but even if I were bootstrapping, I'd still make friends with investors. I'd just talk, hey, I'm building this business and, I'm going to grow it. It's going to be a growth company, but I don't want to raise capital. But what do you think I should do next? I would value that advice and I would try to follow it if I could, because those investors, they're, they wake up every day trying to help founders grow companies. Now, if you don't want to grow your company, you just want to have a lifestyle business, I get that. That's a thing. In fact, you'll probably have a better life. Lifestyle founders, they get a bad rap in the startup world because, oh, it's just a small business. Hey, they have on average, risk adjusted, better lives than venture scale founders. Because even if you're successful as a venture scale founder, you're going to get kicked in the gut every other day, and the stress on your body and your mind is going to be crushing. But maybe you're going to be a unicorn, maybe you're going to be big fat millionaire someday. Great. uh, Lifestyle business, maybe you never make more than $1 million a year. Like, oh, that's small fry. Who cares about that? That's fantastic. Like, if there's a founder and he said, look, I could do this business and it's pretty clear I can make $1 million a year, or I could do this and maybe make 100 or 200 million dollars after 10 years of work. Like, dude, think really hard about that $1 million a year. That could be a fantastic lifestyle. You're going to be super happy. Uh, you're not going to have to deal with all the stuff on the other side of that fence, because that stuff is kick you in the gut every day. Bad, hard stuff. That's why the passion's so important. If you're going to get kicked in the gut every other day, you got to have some other reason to stick with it, because it's not going to be sensible always to stick with it. Reid Hoffman, famous for describing entrepreneurship as the exercise of jumping off a cliff and building a plane on the way down. That's cute and it's true enough. But he never said you have to design the plane on the way down. He didn't say you had to gather the materials on the way down. He didn't say you have to do all of the flight aerodynamic tests before you jump off the cliff, right? You can do that stuff while you're seated safely at the top of the cliff. That's where, like, validation and this framework, this notion that you should be able to say, here's what has to be true in order for me to get to my next milestone. If you're going to jump off a cliff, your next milestone is flight, some kind of flight, so you don't crash. And if you can't tell a cogent story about how you're not going to crash, 95% you're going to crash. So if you can't tell a cogent story, high probability you are going to crash. So instead of quitting your job because you're really passionate about this and you really want to go after it, instead take a minute. Find people who are smart, experienced, understand what you're going to try to do, and ask them, do you think I can achieve flight before I hit the ground? And roll up your sleeves and get into the nitty gritty and know what is the first right next milestone you're going to have to hit. And can you get there? Is there a cogent story about how you could get there? And if there isn't, you probably won't survive. Right? Startups are probabilistic. I wish every founder would just and every investor too, frankly. Investors, I think most of them know this. We don't tell it to founders very often. But startups are inherently probabilistic because the decisions you make are uncertain, right? And you have limited information, so you have to make choices. A good decision is one that is probabilistically sound, right? Will you sometimes make gut decisions? Yes, you'll have to, and there's no escaping that. Will sometimes those be the right ones? Absolutely, but that's the decision you make after you realize, like, there just is no way for me to gather any kind of data, any input from any other resource to tell me whether or not this can even possibly work, right? If you have some go to market like to be tactical for a second. Oh, we're gonna go to conferences, and that's where we're gonna get customers. Like, oh, how many customers are you gonna get? Oh, we'll get, I don't know, 1,000 customers. Really? Okay. Well, how many people are going to be at that conference? 10,000. Okay, so you're going to get 10%. Well, okay, that's a big number, but let's see if you can do it. So how will you get them? Oh, well, we're going to host a party and we're going to do it. Okay, good. Well, how many will attend that party? How many will take your business card? How many will follow up with you? How many will, eventually close? You're going to do an email campaign. Good. How many are going to open it? How many are going to click? How many are going to convert? How many are going to do that? Run the numbers. It's remarkable to me how often founders just don't run the numbers. They think you have to do the experiment. You don't have to do the experiment. There are so many experiments. You can make them fail on paper first. You never have to run the experiment because it's not cogent. It's like you can't even tell a logical story about how it could be true, right? Most of the things that we do, look, innovation abounds. Like we're all trying to do new things in various ways. Very little of the actual tactical execution, has never ever been done before. People have been getting clients by email and by VAR channels and conferences. Like that stuff has been going on for a long, 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 long time. There's ways for you to go find people who have been there and done that before and ask them, hey, here's what we think we're going to do. And if you quantified that and you take that to them and say, hey, we think we're going to do this. If that experienced person says, oh, yeah, you could do that. We should do that all the time. Yeah, that's how you do that. Good. Then run the experiment. But if they say, oh, no, I've been in this business for 15 years, that never works. Here's why. Then you should stop thinking it's going to work. And you should stop thinking you need to do an experiment to see if it'll work. And focus your attention on things that you can tell a coaching
Bob,
story about. I'm ranting.
awesome. I want to ask I want to get a little personal because on the internet, I'm sure you've seen this. There's plenty of advice where it's very general, but I want to get personal with you. So you talk about startups are very probabilistic and you can do things like running the numbers, designing these experiments, and really just like you can, based on just like what the spreadsheet math you do, you can see if a experiment is viable or not. You've built startups of your own, 4 venture-backed startups. I want to ask you, how did you choose what idea to work on, what to work on? And then, as a follow up for these startups, how did you then design these experiments, run the numbers, very specific? Like, what did you do? Like, your last startup, you built a venture back, cool. How did you design these experiments? How did you run the numbers? What did those numbers look like? And then, what did you learn? And then, as the last part, how can founders take that same formula you used to design their own experiments to run the numbers to see, okay, this is viable or this is not viable.
Yeah. So my first couple of companies, I didn't do this. I sucked at this. I didn't really realize. I didn't know all these things. There's something, do something for 20 years, and you get better at it over time. The first things that you did, you don't have the benefit of that 20 years of experience. So, but that said, I've always been somewhat analytical, I guess. My to get really personal, uh, uh, one of the nicknames that my family gave me when I was younger, and I didn't know this at the time. They told me about this later. They talk about me behind my back. They called me Diligence Boy because every time they'd say, "Yeah, well, such and such," and I go, "Really? Is that true? I'm not sure." And then I'd go look it up. I go, actually, no, it didn't go that way. It went this way. Here's what really happened. Everybody says that, but look, this is the truth. Like, here's the facts and da da da. So I was always kind of had a little bit of that in my head, and maybe I was annoying to my family too. Um, but I didn't have this. I learned a lot. Every startup was a big batch of lessons, right? And I learned a ton and I think I probably learned more by helping other startups than I ever learned on my own. By my last startup, I had figured out modeling. I think modeling is super super important. When you see, in fact, that's the one piece of advice. Right, I got lucky. I lightly modeled stuff in my early career, and now I'm much more rigorous about the way I think about
And Bob, we're
modeling.
talking about financial modeling, right? To
No,
clarify,
no,
what's that?
assumption modeling,
Okay.
milestone model. Yeah, when I see a startup and I say, yeah, do you have a model? They always think like, yeah, here it's 19 tabs, it's 17,000 linked formulas created by a CPA that shows 5 years of forecast, blah, blah, blah. Like, wait, you're raising pre seed. You don't know any of that. Even seed. Series A, barely, right? Pre seed and seed, if you show me a spreadsheet that goes out 3 or more years, I'm going to glance at it and I'm probably never going to touch it again because all I know is that won't happen. I don't know what will happen, but it won't be that because there's no way that early on you can have quantified assumptions that allow you to project that far out. Your headlights, pre-seed and seed, mostly seed, a little, later seed maybe, but your headlights go out about 4 to 6 months, and that's the part I care about. So if you're a founder and you're pre-seed or seed, yeah, if a institutional investor asks you for a 3 year forecast, you give them what they ask for, but you're not going to wow them with that. Really, that's just validation that you're thinking about this market being big too. Are you thinking about this being a company that's going to grow big and fast? Like, but that's all you can really get out of that. None of it is true. None of it can be true, right? But if you model your assumptions, you can model your assumptions out to about 6 months. So the tool that you should use is a spreadsheet, and you should say, where do I need to be next? Whatever that milestone is, that milestone must be quantitative, and it must be attached to a time. 5 p.m. on some date. I don't care. Probably more than 4 months out, and probably less than 6 months. If it's more than 6 months, like your credibility just goes down. Like, how do you know? Like, can you really align things in such a way that you can have, you know, any cogent argument for why you're going to get somewhere in 7, 8, 9, 10 months? I've never seen it. I'm not saying if you didn't devote yourself to it, you couldn't do it, but it's rare. And if it's less than 4 months, it's probably not very strategic. I mean, your milestone needs to be strategic. It can't just be the next thing that you think would be big and cool and you want to do. And if your milestone is related to product, like, oh, we're going to build V2, like, investors don't invest in V2. I don't care about V2. I want to know, well, will V2 allow you to get a new kind of customer you couldn't get before, right? You know, it's the business drivers are the things that are the most important. So get a spreadsheet, pick a milestone, 5 p.m., someday, 4, 6 months out, and then work backwards. What must be true in order for you to get there at 5 p.m., right? And if you don't say 5 p.m. or
And
you don't tie it to a
specifically,
day, you're going to be like,
Bob,
yeah,
this milestone we're talking about are we talking about this much in revenue, this many users, like like what milestones did you use for your last startup, for example?
yeah, good. So orders, which translates to revenue, but orders was more important because profitability wasn't as important early on. So it was just, can I get people to buy this thing, and can I get them to buy it in a scalable way? So orders, as an
And what was
example.
the product, by the way, just for the audience's context?
E-commerce, women-focused products. But
Okay.
if you think about your business, the right milestone is the one, and there should only be one. If there's two, okay. If there's three, you're probably not doing it right. Right? You should have one. If it's really has to be two, you can pick two, but do not pick three. And it should be the thing that your next investors think you should have achieved by the time we're going to fund you. Right? So if you don't need to raise in 6 months, then it can be some other thing, right? But the reason that you should pick it is because it unlocks something. So, revenue is typically a good marker for you've unlocked something, right? Having more revenue can unlock things. It has to be quantifiable. So, it could be orders, could be customers, users. Be careful you don't like land on some vanity metric that your investors won't care about. But like if you're a marketplace, GMV might be important, even though it doesn't really show that you can make money as a business yet, but it shows that you can facilitate transactions and people are using the network, and that's scaling. So the metric should be the thing that shows that you've unlocked something or that you're now able to unlock something, right? So this is not just progress in a direction, like, I see so many founders. You ask them where you're going to be in 6 months. They basically break out the hockey stick and they go, we'll be there. Like, really? That's why there? Well, because that's what our growth curve shows. Okay, so that's not cogent. That's nonsense, right? That's throw a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet and make sure the hockey stick goes up like that. Like, I don't care about that. I want to know, and this is really for pre-seed and seed. This is from early stage, right? But I want to know that you're going to spend the very limited resources that you're going to get and the very little amount of time that you have focused on the right things so that you can show up and raise your next round of capital. Because if you don't raise your next round of capital in this early stage, uh, you're highly likely to die, and my investment will go to zero. So I don't want that to happen. So I want founders in this very early stage to over-index on their next round of funding. Right now, you can't predict it. It's like, oh, we're going to raise 1.5 million at this value. On that date, you can't know that stuff. But what you can know is with the resources you have and the time that you have, there's certain things you can achieve and certain things you can't achieve. I want you to achieve the one that your next investors will recognize as, oh, okay, good. You executed on that last round of funding, and now you're at a place where you're ready to go to the next level. And so it will often be something transactional, revenue, customers, users, traffic, things like that. But just be careful about vanity metrics
Bob, so
because, yeah.
let's like stay on like, so you're building this e-commerce company. You've got the assumption spreadsheet open. You've got, how many orders was that in the early stages did you set
Oh God,
as
it was years ago. I
your
don't
goal?
remember now. But what I can tell you about the way that model worked and the way that, I think if I got anything right, I sort of got that part right, was I thought about it over time. And I thought about I'll do a campaign and it'll take, I'll know about clicks in 72 hours. And then the next part of the funnel is they're going to have this engagement. And then that's going to take a week. And then this metric should happen by then. And I did it over time. So I knew that by the time something started and they converted to a customer, it was about 3 weeks, I think, as I recall. And so I could forecast in this modeling sense, like how many of those I would have to have, how long they would take, and how much it would cost in order to get the result that I wanted. And when you think about your assumptions, the problem, part of the problem about financial modeling or financial forecasts that CPAs do for startups is, yes, it's quantifiable, but it completely occludes all the assumptions, right? It just assumes that things are going to happen and they're going to be this big. It doesn't say whether or not it's possible for those things to happen. And a good model tells you if it's possible. And that's why you can skip experiments. Because if you can show that no assumption you can make yields a result like you say you want to get, then it's not going to happen. Right? You can assume it's not going to happen and you don't have to do the experiment. So, as an impulse, try to develop a habit of wanting to make things fail on paper first before you run an experiment, right? Or before you even
So let
spend a
me,
bunch of time planning or whatever, right?
so let's say I've started a e-commerce startup where I say hockey sticks, and I'm new to this and I want to build an assumption spreadsheet. So what I do is I say on top, I say I want 200 orders in 3 months. Next 3 months, I want 200 orders. And then, as you said, I reverse engineer that, say what needs to be true for this to happen. Okay, so my primary acquisition channel is going to be Facebook ads, for example. Okay, if I run this many Facebook ads, as you said, I'll get the data on the clicks at in 72 hours. So okay, I've got this many clicks. Now, based on my website, maybe I'll get this much conversions, this many conversions. So I can play around with all these different elements of my website, show social proof here, put the products here, run these different discount campaigns. And based on that, I might be able to get this many conversions. And then if my average order size, my AOV is like, $50, here's how much I'll make from all those orders. So that's where I want there. That's where I can end up roughly, and then here's how much I'll need to spend to get that many clicks, that get that many conversions, to run this many tests, to get to those, order side revenue. Is that roughly how you're
Those are
designing, how
all
you're going
things,
about?
yeah, yeah. So those are all things that would be elements of a model that if you told me that's what you wanted to do. So first of all, I would say not 3 months. I'd say 4 months, at least 4 months, right? Unless there's
At
a good
least,
reason to
okay.
do less than 4 months, do 4 to 6 months, right? That's where, in my experience, the sweet spot is. And if it's 200 orders, I don't know where you got 200 orders from. Would you consider that to be a very good thing, like investable thing,
That's a
or is
random
that just
example. It's a random number.
well? So you start with the milestone though, so you have to have a purpose, right? Otherwise, it's just like I'm going to run this thing, and if I get to 200, what does that tell you? Is 200 a decision point? Do you keep doing this business if you get to 200, or if you don't get to 200, do you stop doing this business? What is it about 200? If it's just like I wonder if I could get 200. Oh, that'd be cool if I could get 200. If that's what it is, then that's not a venture scale business, or it's not even a venture scale mindset, right? Right. You're trying to the model is to help you overcome uncertainty and time. And if it's 203 months and it's like not a big deal, it's like a side business, like I don't know, yeah, run a model on it. You should run a model on it, but there's nothing at stake. If you only got 120, you would be like, oh look, I only got 120. Huh? Oh well, right? There's nothing at stake. Uncertainty is not bearing down on you, forcing you to make a high quality decision about how you spend your time and resources. That's what this framework is about, is solving for uncertainty and time. And you gave me an example where 200 doesn't feel very uncertain. That doesn't feel like a stretch at all. And it's 3 months, and like if you get there, like I don't know what happens if you don't get there. Like with startups, you quit your job. Are you not going to are you going to quit your job to get those 200 orders? If you're not, then there's nothing at stake. Like it's not a good example to model. But let's say you believe deeply that hockey sticks are the product of the future, and you think it's a massive market, and you're going to quit your job to do this. So your opportunity cost, you're a smart guy. Eventually, you're going to make many six figures of income. But let's say like you're an engineer, you're going to build this product, and you're skilled, you're good at what you do. It gives you confidence you can build this product. Well, so Google or some big tech company would probably pay you a couple hundred grand a year. So you're going to sacrifice a couple hundred grand a year. You can do this for a year. That's $200,000 cost for you. All right. So at least that has to be at stake. And now you say, I'm going to go get 200 orders in 4 months. So I'm going to assume that, those aren't $50 hockey sticks, right? That it's a recurring $50 a month, right? And it's going to grow 30% month over month. And like, you're going to build something big. So with hockey sticks, Facebook as a channel, you could do the experiment, and if the experiment is a small experiment, you're going to get results that are like, yeah, for that small experiment, that's how it went. But does that scale? Most acquisition channels like that, they have a capacity. Like you can only get so much out of that channel, and they have a velocity. You can only get them to grow that fast. So I your assumptions around 200 are, yeah, so what? Like get to 200, what does that prove? Right? What you want to prove is that market or that channel is a viable channel for you to scale into, right? And that requires you go find people who have run ads campaigns for companies selling stuff like you're selling to customers like you're selling. You can do secondary research. You just go read stuff about people talk about conversion rates on Facebook. You'll learn all about that stuff. But in the end, if you're going to trust an experiment for your 200K opportunity cost, like you got to go deeper than, yeah, I'm going to run a $20 experiment, and look, I got this many click throughs, so now I should just go and I'm going to go get that thing. That doesn't tell you squat, right? As opposed to going and talk to someone who's been in e-commerce sales and marketing for 20 years and has worked for 5 companies in e-commerce that sell stuff, sporting goods, and has done dozens and dozens and dozens of campaigns just like you want to do, selling different products. and you say, here's what I want to do. And I think, it has to be more than, a side gig. Although you should model your side gigs too, right? There's no reason not to model, but it's just nothing at stake. But in this case, if this was a venture scalable business you wanted to build, a trivial experiment on Facebook to get 200 orders is not a validation point for a venture scale company, right? You need to say, here's we're going to raise capital and we're going to do campaigns like this, channels like this, using tactics like that, with conversions like this, and we're going to get something big out of that. So big that you're going to want to give us capital and own a piece of this company. See how that changes the way in which the model matters? The model doesn't matter in the same way. There's nothing at stake if it's, I like the example, hockey sticks, right? I like that. But, if you translate that then though to a venture scale company where there's a lot at stake, the founders' livelihoods, their relationships, people's money, customer, like there's stuff at stake, and it could fail. And if it fails, it's a bad thing. Failing is bad. Not selling 200 hockey sticks, I'm not clear if that's bad or not. Like, it wouldn't be as good as selling 200 hockey sticks, but the things that are at stake, the things that make you need to overcome uncertainty and time, the things that make that worth doing, like spending time and energy doing the work to figure out if the thing you think you can do is possible, and if it is possible, is it probable? Like, the things that motivate you to want to do that have to be significant, right? So, pick any other company where they're selling, something bigger than hockey sticks, and the founders have been at it for, a year and a half, and they haven't achieved velocity yet, and they're running out of money, and they're thinking, my God, what are we going to do? You break out of frickin' models what you do, and you figure out where you need to be next, and you devote all of your time, resources, and energy to achieving that next right thing. That all the smart, experienced people who understand what you're trying to do, who are trying to help you figure this out, they agree that yes, that's the right next place to be. You should try to get there. Now, if you can't get there, if you can't tell a cogent story about the next milestone, it's not really cogent. It's not a good milestone. It's not the right milestone. What makes it the right milestone is partly you can actually do it. If you can't actually do it, it's not the right milestone. And I regret that there are, folks in the startup world who believe that it is really only about being aggressive and stretch goals and swinging for far fences and just giving it your all and moving hard and fast in a direction. Like, ugh, 95% failure rate, that's not working. Right? That is not a good recipe. That leads to a lot of failures. And when a company fails, and there's a little bit of a disconnect between investors and founders. Investors want founders to take risk, like, yeah, go for it. I'll give you some money, go do that thing, right? They're going to have a portfolio of companies, and the power law tells them that they only need a very small percentage of those to break out. And they frankly, I don't mean this, to be as harsh as it might sound. They don't care if a bunch of their portfolios fail. They know they're going to have to fail. That's a part of the business. Like, and if you're pre-seed, like 50% of your companies are probably not going to return the investment. They're probably going to go out of business. And you're like, yeah, but that's part of the math. Yeah, but every one of those founders, they're not math. Those are people with families. That's serious. Investors like, yeah, it's part of the math. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Well, yeah, you'll get it. Some will get it right. And if the ones that don't get it right, like, so what? They didn't get it right. That's okay. They're young. They'll figure it out. They'll do another one. But, part of the byproduct of having done this as long as I have, and having worked with, literally hundreds of founders, is I see the aftermath of the failure. It's bad. So I want to have them not fail so bad, like fail less often. And when you do fail, fail better. Like, see it coming, like be able to make choices to pivot if you need to abandon that one and go find a better one, right? there's other options besides just pound your face into the asphalt, right? So that's part of my, if I have a personal mission around all this, is to help founders have a better life. The shit is hard. You're probably going to fail. Okay, failure is part of it. Get good at it. With poker, the best players fold 80 to 90% of the time. Like, you should get good at folding. Folding is a skill. Like, knowing when to fold, like that's a gift if you're good at folding. And you're going to have to do it a lot, so you should get good at it. Failure is equivalent. You should get good at failing and knowing that lots of stuff you think is going to work is not going to work. And you should come to terms with that and figure out the best way to handle that environment, one in which 95% of the time startups fail. And even when they don't fail, a lot of the things they did along the way failed. This stuff is hard. It's uncertain, right? And there's a clock running. You've got to beat the clock. So get good at decision making in a way that improves the probability that you can actually get out alive.
Now, Bob, I want to ask you one last question because we're at the hour mark already, and there's a lot to
No,
talk about. I mean, 20 years of experience is no easy thing to break down in an hour. But the last question I've got for you is, do you notice that a lot of the successful founders around you are as analytical as you are, where they are really talented and they're really good at like just breaking down everything very logically, modeling everything, their assumptions, etc.? Or do you find that it's a bit of a mixed bag?
it's a mixed bag for sure. And it's not required that you be an analyst, right? A lot of successful founders don't like to break open a spreadsheet, all the time, and that's okay. But what I think I see in founders, if I see anything, is a curiosity to solve problems, right? That's a really good indicator that this founder is not just going to come in and say, yeah, no, but it has to be this way, and I have a vision, and it's got to. No, it's like, I'm trying to build a company here, and I know it's going to be hard, and I want to chart a course through this, and I want to get help. Founders who don't want to get help, there's plenty of founders, I suppose, who've been very successful, being a loner and not wanting help, and they were just brilliant or lucky. But I think founders who seek help, you know, who regularly communicate with their investors, who want to help them more than anyone else, uh, they seek advisors that aren't just sort of marquee photographs on a slide deck, uh, uh, but they're actually the ones who can fill the gaps, and they value that. Like, I don't know how that works, and I need an advisor who can help me figure out how that works. Like, they look around for the problems, and they look to build a team that can solve those problems. Like, those are good making qualities of a founder. Um, but the analytical part, it's just there aren't enough founders who are analytical. I don't even know if I'm that analytical, frankly. I think I learned this. Which, by the way, the not if there's any saving grace to this whole groundwork framework thing, it's anybody can do it. It's not hard. Yes, a spreadsheet is involved, but it's not hard. Any founder can do it. I was a philosophy major. I was pursuing my PhD in philosophy when I got recruited to be the CTO of a startup. Right now, there's some analytical bent to Western philosophy for sure. Critical thinking is important, right? But it's not like I was a financial analyst, right? I wasn't a CFO. I code, and I guess I philosophize. I guess I had an avocation and a vocation, and vocation was my technology, and my avocation was philosophy. And I think they come together nicely in the startup world, but they're not necessary by any stretch. What you have to do as a founder is take the assets that you have and then fill the gaps, because we will all have gaps. So if you're not particularly analytical and you don't have a co-founder who's analytical, look for advisors who could help you develop your analytical side. If there's a like in our fund, one of the things if we look for anything, like, oh, I want a founder that's X, disciplined. That's the earmark for me as an investor. I want to know that the founder knows that there's hard work to be done and wants to do that hard work. And that hard work includes navigating a path that it's not just going to unfold in front of them, that they're not just going to, like, everybody's going to want to work with them because it's such a great idea and such a big market. Every investor's going to want to invest in us, and get out of the way and don't bother me with the details. I'm not going to invest in that founder. Not because they won't be successful. I don't know if they'll be successful, but because I know I can't help them. And if I can't help a founder, I'm probably not going to invest in them. And I just think that probabilistically, the the better tools for you to take into this game are critical thinking, rationality, the analytical stuff, like, the this kinds of analysis you have to do is not hard. It's not deep analysis. It's just identify what has to be true in order for you to get somewhere. Like, that's the core of it. Where do you need to be, and what has to be true in order for you to get there? Quantify that, get some people around you who can help you figure out, like, what you're assuming would have to be true. And if you break it down, you find out, like, wow, there's no way for this company to get to that place. You should stop saying you're going to get to that place, because you're not going to get there. And investors can see that. That's why you get so many, hey, love what you're working on, keep us on your update list, would like to see X, right? You see that because you're not telling a cogent story.